Hello. Okay, welcome to, we're going to discuss our cropping systems now. We're going to start with annual crops. And I'm going to we're going to jump right into this one with the slides, and I'm not going to have a lot of dialogue on each slide I'll just kind of make some points. But there are a few kind of overarching principles and thoughts that I want you to keep in mind as you go through these slides. One is we're trying to create a system with as much diversity as possible. Nature abhors a vacuum, so monocropping systems where you only have one or limited number of species, is not really how nature works. And in our regenerative and sustainable agriculture, we want to work the within how nature how things work. And so when you're planting and when you're planning your crops, annual, perennial, or whatever that looks like, or livestock, you want to create as diverse of a system as possible. So another key thought is really there's no one best practice. It's going to look differently for you on your operation, and you're trying to create an environment with you kind of at the center, but within all of the limitations and all of the whatever you have to deal with in your physical and kind of mental environment when you're creating these plans. So it's okay to experiment, and it's okay to fail, because there are a lot of elements that are out of your control as a farmer. And so the best we can do is just to be flexible and come into it with as much knowledge and as much preparation as you can. But even with all of that, you still might fail, and that's okay. You just got to keep going. And if you have a crop that doesn't germinate properly, or it does germinate properly and later in the growth cycle it fails because of fungal issues or weather issues, or it's too hot or it's too windy, um, as long as you're working kind of within the time frame of when that species needs to be planted, then you got to try again. So those are a couple of concepts. I'm going to go through these slides, and I'm going to kind of maybe touch on some quick thoughts and ideas that I have about each one. But otherwise, I'm going to leave it to you to kind of look at the information and digest it. And some of these different plants or annual plants may make sense to you in your planning. They may not. It may not be something that you want to think about when you're in your crops that you want to grow. But and these are not by far every annual plant that you might want to grow. So feel free to go beyond what's on these slides and experiment and learn beyond what I've presented. Beans are a great companion crop. They work well in conjunction with other crops in that they are leguminous and they provide nitrogen for the soil. What one particular regimen that is of particular note is the Three Sisters, which combines corn along with a vining crop like squash or watermelons and pole beans. They all provide benefit to each other. We've discussed this system previously, and so that's a great way a great example of companion planting and the benefit that beans provide both the soil and other plants that are planted near. Bush beans are a great work well in a succession planting plan, as they have kind of a more determinate production cycle. So bush beans will work well planted successively so that you can have a longer harvest over time. Pole beans do require trellis, so that's another consideration, is to provide a physical trellis that beans can climb up. Makes harvesting easier. Beets are a great cool weather crop. It's essentially two crops. There are value in both the roots as well as the tops, or the greens. The greens are not commonly found in markets, but are very nutritious and very flavorful. So there definitely some consideration there for two crops. Beets are better direct seeded, but can be transplanted if care is taken to not disturb those roots. A benefit of transplanting can be better spacing, so that there's more consistency in spacing. As those beets grow, they'll have more room to bulb up. And then also if you have a harsh environment, that helps kind of avoid some of those pitfalls of insect and weather pressure. I definitely recommend transplanting cabbage if you have systems to do so. Direct seeding can be done when those environmental stressors are minimal, but typically when cabbage is, at least in Texas, when it's required to plant through the season, there are always environmental stressors. So it's best to do transplants as much as possible. Most all cabbage varieties will tolerate freezing temperatures, but of course prolonged significant freezing events will slow the growth and potentially cause damage. So it might be beneficial to implement row cover to help protect from those prolonged freezing events. And then I'm partial to Napa and Chinese cabbage, like bok choy, which are basically require similar cultivation to some of the more familiar heading cabbages. For carrots, I definitely recommend direct seeding. I don't recommend transplanting at all. With that in mind, succession planting can be critical to extending the harvest of carrots. While they do store well and it's easy to kind of maintain a supply, I think it's better for freshness and nutritional density to plan successive harvests, so that you can have those over a longer period of time. Also for carrots, timing is pretty critical, especially for late fall and early spring harvest. Frost and cold temperatures will increase sugar content in carrots, so they're definitely a cool weather crop, and they will not perform well in hot weather. So definitely keep that in mind, and I wouldn't recommend trying to grow carrots out of season. Corn is a heavy feeder, so definitely make sure to have a fertility plan for continuous fertilization throughout the growing season. I would either plant them with a leguminous crop, or interplanted with a leguminous crop, or rotate them with legumes to help replenish and rebuild that soil. And that could be beans, that could be southern peas. And so I would definitely keep that in mind when you're creating your plan. Also, earworms, of course, can be a problem for corn. So definitely when the corn tassels, you want to keep an eye out for those earworm moths to help mitigate potential damage. Another strategy is to just come to terms with this pest, which is fairly ubiquitous with corn, and just do your best to potentially remove that before consuming, if the damage is not too extensive. And then corn can also be successively planted, or succession planted to extend the harvest through the growing season. And then I would also plant corn in blocks. It's wind pollinated, so the more densely it can be planted rather in long straight rows, the better pollination you'll have with it. Cucumbers are, I would definitely recommend trellising cucumbers, as they're a vining crop, and this will help promote a better use of your rows so that they don't take up a lot of space. They're a great companion crop with radishes, especially early on in their growth, as they occupy different dimensions in the garden space. And then they can also be planted both in the spring and the fall. So garlic requires a long season, particularly through the winter. So it's best planted in the late fall and then allowed to grow through the winter, and then really takes off in that springtime phase before it gets too hot. Scape removal is important. So the scape is the kind of the flower, if you will, stalk, although it's not a flower. Scape removal as the stalk is curled is ideal, as it also is a secondary crop that you can harvest, and there is a market for scapes. So when it's shaped kind of like a question mark is the ideal time to clip those at the base of the stalk. And you want to do this before, as it is a question mark shape, before it becomes kind of an exclamation point shape. And then critical to the storage and the longevity of garlic during the off season is proper curing and storage. This is important both for quality as well as maintaining the life of those bulbs before it's time to plant again or harvest again, if you will. And then of course you want to make sure that you maintain seed stock. Garlic will definitely acclimate to your space, so keeping seed from year to year is important for the successful growing of garlic. Lettuce is definitely a cooler weather crop. It will be bitter, and it also quickly will bolt, along with being prone to pest damage and diseases if planted in warmer temperatures. So definitely consider this more kind of on the shoulders of fall and spring. Also, most seed companies produce great mixes for harvesting as baby greens. So there are two ways that you can plant, both as a heading crop and as a baby greens crop, which can be harvested for mixes. So for melons, trellising is great for those with limited space and cleaner fruit. Of course, keeping in mind that is dependent on the size of the fruit, as the heavier melons will tend to weigh down any trellising and also potentially break at the stalk. You want to make sure that the trellis is strong, both for the weight and if you're in a windy area, that trellis will hold up once those vines are mature and the fruit is mature. And then of course, as those fruits mature and get close to ripening, you definitely want to limit your watering, as overwatering can cause splitting, and which will in turn will cause crop loss. Bunching onions, which are not discussed too extensively in this slide, are a great option for spring planting. And also for transplants for summer and fall harvests. Another consideration for onions is definitely curing and storage. They're critical to the durability and storage. Similar to garlic, after harvesting, you allow onions to dry in a well-ventilated, kind of shady spot for several days to weeks, and make sure to allow those tops to completely dry back before removal. Don't remove those in the field, as that energy will help promote storage and durability. And then you want to trim those dried tops and roots, and then store the onions in bags for breathability in a low humid, like 50 to 75 degree environment. Definitely don't recommend direct seeding peppers. Always do this through transplants. So incorporate that timing into your plan. Peppers will perform better if they have support. So caging or trellising will help support the plants, especially when those fruits get heavier later in the season. Also consider providing both protection from strong winds as well as from the extreme sun during the summer months, as fruit will scald, and foliage will potentially burn, and also the wind can do considerable damage to the branches as they tend to be somewhat brittle. And then also consider planting some flowering plants that will attract pollinators, which will improve your fruiting. For potatoes, seed potatoes will potentially perform better, but if you're in a pinch, you can also just use organic potatoes from the grocery store. I would definitely, it's probably also a more economical option than ordering seed potatoes. Those you'll just allow to eye out, and the same process as using seed potatoes you'll use for organic potatoes from the grocery store. When you're harvesting potatoes, don't clean that dirt initially from those potatoes. Allow that dirt to dry on the potatoes themselves. If you want that skin to cure and to harden a bit before you try to rub off any soil, otherwise you'll damage the crop. And then always store cured potatoes in the dark in ventilated bags to prevent any greening or eyeing over the life of the storage of the potatoes. Radishes are one of my favorite crops. They're really easy. They're easy to grow in small spaces or in containers, and they're quick. So to maturity, usually you're looking at a month or just a little bit more, depending on the type of radish. I would also consider succession planting, as a little goes a long way with radishes. So to extend your harvest, you could definitely plant several successions over the season. I would consider starting summer squash early to avoid squash bugs. They're ubiquitous and very difficult to manage and or eliminate. Make sure to dispose of infected plant material away from the garden, and burn it if you can. Once plants senesce and slow in production, I would also pull those pretty immediately to avoid any kind of further infection of squash bugs. Another consideration is squash blossoms. They're a great secondary crop, which are somewhat unique and don't see a lot of, so that can be kind of a value-added crop along with the fruit of summer squash. Winter squash, definitely want to pay attention to curing winter squash. It's critical to long-term storage. Also store in a sufficiently ventilated, kind of dark, cool space. Another thought is that seeds can be saved from most of the varieties for consumption. So that might be another kind of value secondary crop. Swiss chard is one of my favorite greens to grow. It's related to beets, and you'll notice the similarities if you grow it to beet greens. This is definitely one that performs well when transplanted, but you have to be very careful not to disturb the roots. So it can be planted direct from seed, but transplanting works well as long as you're careful. And if left in the right conditions, chard will reseed itself. So in hotter months. So that's definitely something to keep an eye out for. If you don't want it in a certain space over time, then definitely prevent that prevent these plants from going to seed. Tomato is another that I wouldn't recommend direct seeding. You'll have a lot more success by transplanting. You definitely want to provide some trellising or support, both for determinate and indeterminate varieties, especially for indeterminate varieties. But the determinate ones that tend to have a smaller growth habit will benefit from trellising. It'll also make harvesting easier. Tomatoes are great companions with carrots and lettuce as kind of understory crops. And then also remember that tomatoes won't fruit once the nighttime temps get above 75, and this is the case for most vegetables as well. But tomatoes will be of particular note for that occurrence. And in this case, I would consider planting more cherry and small fruited varieties, as they tend to be a bit more heat tolerant. And finally, watermelons. Watermelons take up a little bit of space unless you're growing smaller varieties that can benefit from trellising. So keep that in mind. I would also consider planting flowering crops around watermelons to help attract pollinators. And then similar to cantaloupe and muskmelon, you want to monitor watering as the fruit nears ripeness, as watermelons can also split with overwatering.